So, you just got all the parts you need to build your computer. You got your motherboard, power supply, graphics card, but as it turns out, you're sadly allergic to YouTube tutorials. Don't worry, we're gonna get through this. Today, I'll be showing you how to build your computer. Now, what you want to do first is that you make sure you don't want to accidentally shock your components while you're working on them. So you're going to want to plug in your power supply, turn it on, so then every time you touch it, you'll be connected to ground and you won't have to worry about electrostatic shock. So you want to make sure that it's plugged in correctly and then switch it on. And then every time you touch the metal part of it, electrostatic is no longer on your body. Take that. Now, what you want to make sure what you want to do next is putting in the CPU. Now, we're using an Intel i5. It's not overclockable, so you get what you pay for. Now, what you want to do here is you make sure this tiny little triangle here lines up with this tiny dot on the motherboard. Because you don't want to mess up with any of the pins on the motherboard. If one pin is out of place, the whole thing is ruined. Alright, now make sure it's like nice and snug in there. And you carefully put down the retention arm. And the plastic cover comes off. And now you have a CPU in the motherboard. Now that we have the beating heart of the computer, that is the CPU and our motherboard, we have to put in the RAM. Now, you want to make sure when installing this that the notch here lines up with the notch on the motherboard right here. So don't just shove it in. You want to make sure that it lines up. There. Now, when you're installing only 2 sticks of RAM, you want to place them like every other slot, like so. But since I have 4 sticks of RAM, we're just going to be placing it in every slot, like so. And now that we have both the CPU and RAM into our motherboard, I think it's time to actually put it into the case. Just because if we put in anything else right now, it's going to be hard to get to the actual other components later. Now I'm going to use this iFixit kit provided by Laura Oaks to actually do most of this stuff. Most computer cases have their screws on the back, just like 2 screws you have to worry about. Oh, it's the wrong size. But yeah, simple as unscrewing 2 screws, and voila. Now, what you want to make sure of before you put in the motherboard, that there are standoffs here where holes on this motherboard are. Like, it's going to be one here, here. It's going to be as much as the motherboard needs. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. You put in this I/O shield right on the back. This is to make sure that dust doesn't get in from the back. So I just want to make sure it's nice and secure in there. Alright, so you carefully want to make sure that it goes in nice and easy. Lines up with the I/O shield and should line up with the screws. I'm sorry, standoffs. You'll see that there's gold at every single slot. Now you want to make sure that when you screw it in, just stop when you start feeling some resistance. It's not like that big of a deal. You go like several screws holding it in place besides. The motherboard PCB might actually get damaged if you screw it in too tight. Okay, I got almost all of them on. Okay. This last one isn't actually necessary. I'm just putting in just so that I don't lose the screw. Alright, now our motherboard is nice and secure. Oh wait, I actually forgot. I have to put in this front panel I/O. Now, this varies with like every motherboard, so I can't tell you exactly which order these wires go in, but the front panel pins should be like down at the bottom right. Alright, I consulted the manual for the motherboard, and it goes like so. The blue wire, or the reset switch, goes in here, and the hard drive LED, or the red wire, goes in right next to the blue. And this orange wire, or the power switch, should just go in on top of blue. Alright. And then green. It's so tangled because it's like torn in two. Green goes on top of red. It's the power LED. And then you have your front panel all plugged in. Now for this next step, I'm actually going to have to remove the other side panel, because I actually want to manage some of the cabling. Cable management is like one of the most important parts in like terms of keeping everything organized, because not only does it affect like how tangled everything is, but also it affects the airflow. So if you have a messy cable management, then you're gonna expect some worse performance due to worse airflow, worse cooling, everything. Okay. So I'm gonna try and connect the rest of the front panel I/O before I connect the power supply to the case. So I'm actually gonna just unplug it all from here. I actually forgot to route it to the back. So I'm just gonna reroute it all again down here so that I can get more airflow. Now I'm gonna route these cables, like the front panel audio, down here, and the USB 3.0 up here, because they're all in separate locations on the motherboard. Like USB panel, it goes into this little slot right here, and this front audio panel goes into this slot right here. And now we have all of our front I/O connected to the motherboard. Okay, now with that out of the way, I think we're actually ready to put in our power supply. Okay, so we're gonna need to put in our power supply at a downward configuration as an exhaust. You can do it either way, but I just prefer it facing down, so we can actually get some fresh air out of the lower ground instead of taking in heated air that you get from here. Because computers nowadays can actually generate a lot of heat. Alright, so back here you'll see 4 screw slots. But since Newegg decided to cheat me, I only have 3 screws, so bear with me here. Okay, so it's like one slot right here. Want to make sure it goes in. Okay, another screw hole right here. Make sure I screw this in nice and tight too. Last one, for me at least. If you had a fourth one, you'd screw it in right here, but only got 3. So you make the best out of what you got. Alright, so next up, you actually get some cables with your power supply, because the one I have is fully modular. Some power supplies come with the cables pre-installed, but for the reasons that you might want a fully modular power supply, you don't have to fill the whole case with a bunch of wires you don't need. And with less wires, you don't have to do as much cable management and such. So I'm just gonna look for, here it is. Motherboard wire right here. And there is the, I'm actually gonna need this for the graphics card. Usually, for power supplies, they just label it VGA for your graphics card. So just hang on to that. What I was looking for was the CPU power cable, because there's 2 different locations on the motherboard for power. This is the motherboard. It goes up here. As you can see, it has the right amount of slots in there. For the CPU, it's all the way in this tiny corner. It's very tiny and it's hard to see. It's probably going to be hard to get up in there. But don't worry, it's not going to fit. Alright, after some fiddling with the case, we were actually able to fit this cord up in here. So let me just somehow get the correct orientation, because there's a little notch on each and every power slot, which you have to line up correctly, otherwise it's not going to fit and it's not going to work. So since these come apart, you have to pull them together and make sure that it don't separate when installing. And snap and snap. And they're both in. Let's go. Alright, want to make sure it's nice and in there, nice and tight. Route from the... Ron, why are you laughing? And once it's down here, you actually have to go through the trouble of making sure it's in the right slot. Now, it's going to be hard to see, but this one all the way over here, it says CPU. We're going to plug this one into there, because it's obviously connected into the CPU slot. And boom! One power cord down. Now I have to connect this giant octopus leg of a cord into the motherboard, or MB slot. I'm just going to drag this through here, so then we'll just have a giant wire sticking out. And we're going to put in this first part. And then this part. Takes a lot of strength to actually put them in. I don't know why. Right. And then we're just going to pop it through here onto this little slot. And there. Now we have all the connections we need on the motherboard. Oh, actually I lied. We're going to have to put in the SSD, then connect it to the motherboard. Now, with SSDs, you don't have to worry about like dropping it, unlike hard drives where it has actual moving parts, so you have that to worry about. But SSDs, no, it does it all digitally, like electronically. No moving parts here, no magnets to worry about. Now, It's a 2.5-inch SSD, so I'm going to put it into this smaller slot until it locks in. Just like that. And now, we take our SATA cable. You go down here for better cable management. Make sure it doesn't get in the way of any other wires, otherwise you're going to have a mess to sort through. Now, SATA is down here. It's going to be confusing to actually look in here, but actually, while I have this open space, I'm going to put in the graphics card power cable in here. So I won't have to do that later. So it goes into VGA1. It's very hard to see because like it's at the bottom, but it's a lot easier to work with when you're actually seeing it with your own eyes. Alright, plugged into the slot labeled VGA1, and I'm gonna put this SATA cable into SATA 1. Or I'm sorry, SATA 2. Because it's gonna be less space I'm gonna have to use up. Now over here, I'm just gonna plug it in onto this SATA power port. Okay, now that's plugged in, so we'll get power. Alright, Ryan, cable me. Thanks, Ryan. Now, you want to plug this thing in. Oh, it's upside down. Alright. And I'm just going to route it under here, just for cleaner cable management on this side. It might not look good on the actual other side, but it's not that side with all the wires that's being presented now, is it? If it looks good on one side, then you can forget about the other side, because it's probably never going to be presented whatsoever. Alright, with our SSD fully hooked up, I think it's about time we actually put in our CPU cooling unit, which is a Noctua NHU12S. It's one of their cheaper fans, but, you know, provides the same performance as their more expensive counterparts. It's kind of big and bulky. But I've never seen CPU go above 80 degrees with this thing on. So we just, yeah, we have all this stuff. Now, since Noctua compensates for like all kinds of CPU configurations, like AMD and other stuff, it brings like a ton of other equipment for it. But since we're just using Intel LGA 1151, we won't be needing like any of this. Of course, we're going to need the back plate and these nice little screws that they provided. Now, we're going to need to put in these little stoppers so then they won't fall off. I want to make sure that's put in this way, because there's like a little triangle shape that could be also put on this way. You want it out, you want it in. And just to make sure. You'll hear a little click on the screw once the washer is on. Alright. Now with that out of the way, we can actually head to install this on the back. Now, you want to make sure it's in this orientation when you install it. Alright, as you see, screws went through. On the other side, you will see here clearly sticking out. So now what you want to do is to install these washers onto the screws. Now, what you want to do next, put these two plates on here, nice and carefully. And then you put these little screw tops on top so that they won't fall out. And I'm gonna get my screw to finish the job. Alright, now we can install this big chonker of cooler. Now, we actually might want to... we're actually going to have to just slide this thing, hopefully it doesn't crush any of the cords, onto its side. I'm sure everything's fine, don't worry. Alright. Now we're gonna take this bottom part off. You see, this thing is like shiny clean. Oh, I actually have to remove the fan so then it doesn't get rid of the ram. So we're just gonna take these edges, take it off, and put this on later. Oh. How do these heat sinks get bent? Oh my god. Jeez. Alright, I think it's relatively normal now. Alright. And I almost forgot the most important step. We're gonna have to apply the thermal paste. I'm using like an Arctic brand thermal paste. Now, for some reason, people don't actually see the purpose of getting thermal paste, but what you want to know, it's really there to actually improve thermal connectivity between the pad on the tower cooler and on the CPU. Because even though you may not see it, there are like microscopic hills and valleys on like the CPU and on the tower cooler pad. And it might not seem like that big of a deal, but you put some of this on, it can make a huge difference in temperatures. Alright. Now you want to put one the size of a rice grain. So you do that. Not too much, otherwise it would get messy. There's no real problem with adding too much thermal paste, but it can get messy. It might like slip on to the underside. Now you want to make sure you get this nice and even. Okay. Alright. You want to make sure that you distribute the weight evenly. Do one side and then the other side. Just little by little. So then the thermal paste gets spread out evenly. Alright, now to put on the fan is actually not that hard. You just gotta put that there. And for the other side, it's the same thing as I did on this side. You just take that middle bar and then do that. Now, this goes on the fan header labeled CPU fan. And it's actually hard to get into it just with how big this thing is. Boom, it's in. Now to put in our graphic card. What are you doing here? Put our graphic card. There. Now this is like an AMD Radeon 6600 XT. Now remember, golden rule. Don't touch the golden shiny stuff. Right. Now I'm gonna put it into this PCI Express slot. Usually want to put it to the slot closest to the CPU. Now once it's in, you carefully, there. Now you put in the screws. You are good to go, but we also need to put in this power cable. There's a little tiny power slot right there. We're gonna put that in. And then get a GPU in. Now put in the side panels. We're just gonna finish up here because we actually got all of our components that we need. Alright, well, with all this wires back here, I doubt we're actually gonna be able to do this in one sit. I got an idea. Now, if the heat pipes and the Noctua fan isn't touching the table right now, this is probably a good way to actually make sure that it's all nice and tidy. Now, you screw it in. Now I'll take one last look at this masterpiece before I seal it behind this thing. Some of these linings, you actually got to make sure you line them up right. And we are actually now done. You have a completed computer tower case right here with all the things that a computer could need.